Yeah, so hello everyone. Good morning or afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Sola Abulu. I'm the principal consultant of Sola Abulu and Associates. Today's video is going to be called The Importance of Audience Smarts. And the reason why I decided to do this video is because I found out that a lot of people may not really understand how important it is to get your audience right. Everything about communication starts and ends with audience. In fact, communications, engagement, messaging, if you miss it in the audience space, you're going to miss it eventually. And I think it's worth the time getting to know your audience, regardless of how small you may think the communications that you're going to do is, it's actually important to take that time to understand who your audience is. So starting off, when you want to do communications of any kind, in other words, you want to pass on a message, whether it's for an event, it's for a campaign, it's for issues management, it's for crisis management, whatever it may be, marketing, whatever it is. I think marketing people understand this very much because marketing, you really can't get anywhere if you don't understand your audience. You're just going to be wasting a whole lot of money and a whole lot of your time, which is not really in your interest. So the first thing you start off with, who is my target audience? That's the first thing. Before that, obviously, you should have come up with what your business objectives are or your organizational objectives are. If it's an event you're inviting people to, if it's a campaign of some sort, are you trying to influence? Are you trying to inform? Do you intend to persuade? Do you want people to change action? Are you asking for enrollment? Whatever it is, you will do it. And all that I'm going to share is going to be very relevant to the private sector, to public sector, faith-based, wherever you may find yourself, NGO. This is generic communications 101, audience smarts, how would I say, things, principles. So you start off from your objectives, whatever they may be, in terms of the business, organization, or strategy. Make sure you get those objectives very clear. And please, I always like to say this in my videos, objectives is not communications objective. So an objective cannot be hold a town hall. An objective cannot be post on Instagram or run a campaign sponsored ads. That's not a sensible objective. Objective is tied to something tangible. So in other words, I want to create awareness about this. I want a particular demographic to know this. I want people to begin to be aware of this product launch. I want to help sales, or I want more people to sign up. I want people to vote for this candidate, whatever it may be, or begin to consider this person as a viable option for this. Whatever that objective is, it has to be something that is pretty tangible. So if we kick off, so the first thing after the objectives is, who is my audience? You first find out who your target audience is. And that seems like a simple question. You'd be like, oh yeah, I just want the general public to know, oh, I'm just targeting this kind of person. Like I said, marketing comms people would know this very well. You don't just say general public. It's about what age, who is my audience, where are they located? Is it a Lagos-based audience? Is it an audience based in this particular location? What's their income level? How do they live? Are they rural people? Are they urban people? Are they students? Are they working class? Are they females of a certain age, demographic? Are they college educated? Are they, artisans? That you have to really break it down, because your knowledge of the audience is going to determine how you're going to communicate to them. And so the demographics, you do that. And then the next thing is you get your audience segments really right, and you really have to write it down. If you do not write down your audience segment, and look, I'm a firm believer in strategy. I always say strategic communications is the only kind of communications, and strategic communications is about being purposeful about your communications and not making assumptions about who you're talking to, how the message is going to land down. For me, I'm someone who I like my communications to achieve its intended objective. I don't know about you. I really have no time for just speaking for the sake of speaking or communicating for the sake of communicating. My goal every time I walk into a meeting, whether it's a conference or I'm a speaker, I'm not a speaker, is to influence, is to persuade, is to inform, is to enlighten. And because I have that target and I have that goal, that determines how I am going about what I'm doing. So it's very intentional, it's very purposeful, and it makes you more, how would I say, impactful in what you're doing. So it's absolutely important in the practice of communication. So you get your audience segment right, which is age, location, gender, income, general demographics, you understand that. And then you begin to profile the audience. Now, public sector communications is one space where I see that this is not done at all. In other words, they make all of the mistakes. And there's a separate post that I'm doing on my Instagram page where we talk about this, but I will talk a little bit about some of these mistakes here as well. I'm trying to keep this short, but let's see how we go on that. So when you now do your audience profile, that's when you now take those segments and then look at the interest of each of those segments, what they are actually, their concerns, what kind of mindsets they have, the belief systems, the value drivers, the perspectives. All of that is important, because if you do not understand that interest, those concerns, those issues, the perspectives that they have, you will not speak to them, or you're likely to say something that is not going to land well, or something that may cause a backlash, something that may end up totally disrupting whatever it is you're trying to achieve. For me, particularly in the public sector communication space, when I see people get angry, when official messaging coming from the public sector officials, from institutions and from the government annoys the recipients, that makes me begin to wonder, was that the intent? Was the intent to annoy people? Was it to antagonize people? Or was it supposed to advocate? Was it supposed to ally? More often than not, that I find out that institutional organizations, particularly governments, they speak to only one audience. It's like they're only talking to certain people, maybe talking to party members, only talking to fellow people like them. And then they wonder why they get this whole backlash, and then they paint it as, oh, these people are just disgruntled elements. No, the problem is your communications is only speaking to one audience, whereas you're spreading it out on a general public platform, and everyone else is listening, and they're like, what are you saying? You know what I'm saying? And people reserve the right to have their opinions about what you say once you express it on a public platform. You can't use a public platform to express your opinions and then expect all of us to keep quiet, which is also the danger of social media. So sometimes, even if people are not your audience, if you're using a public platform, be aware. And every platform, for instance, has their characteristics. So Twitter, we know, is the hotbed of activism. So you need to be really careful what you say there. Facebook, people are generally, comme ci, comme ça. Instagram, anything goes on Instagram. So, you can almost get away with almost anything, on Instagram within reason. But then again, the point is, you need to understand your audience before you communicate. So perspectives, what are the value drivers of your audience is very important, and also think about that on the platforms, because each of the platforms has its own community. So even though you're speaking to, or you may think you're speaking to your own audience within that community, be aware of the wider context of that platform as well. And then what's the point of view of that audience? Again, like I said, institutions, governments, and people who are speaking to a large section of people, or who your messaging is of interest to the general public, you need to be a bit more careful about what you say, how you say it. And again, the next point is now bringing you back to what was your objectives. In other words, when you now have that audience segmentation done, and you've done the audience profiling as well, interest, concerns, perspectives, issues, point of view, mindset, value drivers, beliefs, you then need to ask yourself, what do I want these audiences to do? Am I communicating just for information? Am I communicating for persuasion? Am I communicating to get them to enroll or to sign up or to believe in? Do I require an action from them? Am I just trying to change how they believe, mindset? Am I trying to influence perception? Am I trying to, make them do something? For instance, COVID, I want you to take the vaccine. I want you to wear a face mask. You're trying to influence positive action. And you don't just want me, when I'm communicating, messaging around, public health, I don't just want you to listen and walk away and forget what I say. I want what I say to stick in your mind to the extent that you will leave that place and begin to act differently. So for me to do that, I have to speak to you in a language that you will understand. My messaging must be such that you can accept it, you can receive it. So I have to understand you first before I can communicate to you in such a way as to influence you. I mean, this showed up really strongly in the COVID response, because I think the ability, the one-size-fits-all approach, which a lot of, again, public health, public sector communications approach took, didn't help the matter. So there were certain people who just didn't believe, simply because we were speaking to everybody the same way. So the people who would normally take the vaccine took it because, yes, they were the kind of people that the messaging was tailored for. But how much thought was given to those people who are likely to be vaccine resistant, or reluctant, and how much effort was made to bring them on side, understanding or trying to understand the perspective that they came from. Now, that is just an example. This is not really a conversation about vaccines or that whole response, but it's a good example of how communications can fail if we treat everybody in the same way, trying to understand the perspective that they came from. Now, that is just an example. This is not really a conversation about vaccines or that whole response, but it's a good example of how communications can fail if we treat everybody in the same way. People are different. And if you're communicating to a broad section of people and you require action from them, you need to persuade them, you have to treat them as the segments in which they operate. Nobody really does anything treating diverse people as one people. We're all a product of our experience, our backgrounds, our understanding, the interactions that we've had over time. So what resonates with me will not resonate with other people. But thankfully, you can group people into segments based on certain things and parameters, issues, and even the expressions of the perspectives that they have. And then you tailor your messaging in that way. And you make sure your strategy is robust and it carries everybody along. Also because of what you want to achieve. If that is your objective, then you really need to work hard to make sure that you achieve that. So common mistakes that people make in communications. I've talked about that one. You take a one-size-fits-all approach, so you just communicate to everybody the same way. I see this a lot in public sector communications, which is why many governments are very distant from the people that they rule and they govern, simply for that reason, because they just do not segment their audience well enough. I think marketing companies get it pretty well, and they're able to sort of like carve out their audience within the bigger subset of the public, and then they tailor and they target them very, very, how would I say, aggressively. And their messaging doesn't even get to people who that is not intended for, because they know where their audience is. I think public sector would have to learn a lot from the way marketing actually does communications. Number two common mistake is taking your audience for granted. It's also a follow-up on that. So the assumption that simply because I'm the official person and I'm saying it, therefore you should believe me, you should accept me, that doesn't fly. And again, we saw that very strongly during the pandemic, that you're the government, that you're the health, whatever. It doesn't mean. The point is, this is what I believe. This is what I believe. What are you going to say or do to convince me differently? So that sort of, you just have to understand that in the world that we live in today, people have access to information, which makes them have confidence in certain things. They will not trust you simply because you're an institution. You have to make sure that your communication bridges the gap. And the only way you can do that is to understand the people, first of all, and speak to them in a language that they will understand. So one size fits all doesn't work. Taking your audience for granted is a big communications mistake. Another common mistake, this cuts across private and public sector, is focusing on your own perspective. I've seen many people do this. I've seen this all throughout my career. I continue to see it. People believe that, that their perspective is all that matters. And it's like when you're having a conversation with someone and the person is just talking and not listening to you. Have you ever been in those kind of conversations? They're very uncomfortable to be in. And I personally, in fact, there's some people that I actually avoid speaking to simply because they're like this. All they just want to do is talk. They're not ready to listen. That's how it is when you communicate and you're only focusing on your own perspective. If there's an issue that you're communicating about, either as an organization, as an institution, as a brand, a business, faith-based organization, whatever you call yourself, I would expect that you would have had your ears out and you would be speaking to the perspective that are already out there, that have already been expressed. Why would you be speaking on something that is of interest and not address the sentiments, the perspectives, the points of view that are already out there, and address them in a respectful way, in a way that acknowledges that you've heard this, you understand this, and this is your response. And when I see people getting all antagonistic, I'm like, my goodness, you do not know this profession. It's possible to have a conversation even with people who are opposed to you without being disrespectful. You know what I'm saying? It's just about words. It's about how you tailor the messaging and, not being defensive. You just say, oh, yes, I acknowledge this. And then it's like how you are when you're in court, in the law, in courts. You don't get angry at the prosecution. You're going to lose the case. But you tell it, you factually say what is wrong and you say why it is wrong. And then you make a commitment for what you're going to do and you show evidence of what you have been doing. That's the way messaging is done. So focusing on your own perspective doesn't work. Again, if your objective, if you have a long-term objective to persuade people, to advocate, you're hoping to influence reputation, make people think better of you, to choose you better, you had better take all this into consideration, because not having your messaging or your communications land properly can be disastrous for you, depending on what the stakes are, whether it's investment, whether it's investment, reputation, exposure, political exposure, whatever it may be, being a bit more purposeful and taking these principles into consideration will make a lot of difference. Then number 4 is not listening to external perspective, and I've already talked about that. That's when you're not factoring it into your messaging, you're not factoring it into your communications. And in some public sector communication, particularly government to people, in my part of the world, we see this a lot, where even they actually take into consideration the external perspective, but then they are confrontational about it, they're argumentative about it, to the point that already, I mean, so you've already made up your mind that, it's like you're blowing up the bridges. You don't even care. Because when you're then confrontational and then you're aggressive, you're talking down to people, you're more or less telling them that their opinions doesn't matter. So clearly, your communications at that point, it may satisfy one segment who think, oh yes, you've really spoken to them in the way they should, but then you've won for yourself a whole set of antagonists, which really wasn't necessary. And for most people, audiences, all they want to know is to acknowledge, to see that you actually acknowledge them, their concerns as being valid. So finally, I think I'll just wrap it up there. These are basic tips that, so I'll stop it here. These are basic tips that apply across private and public sector, but I do see a lot of these mistakes more happening in the public sector, sometimes in the private sector, actually. More recently, we've seen a little bit of that, but then there are things that we need to work and really take to really pay attention to. And particularly for us in Nigeria, this political campaign season, these are quick mistakes that really are avoidable. We should pay attention to our audience, segment the audience, think about the interest and the issues and speak to them. Don't be confrontational, address the issue, respond, and let people know that they are being heard. The important thing is, what is my objective? Is it to persuade? Is it to influence? Is it to annoy? Don't annoy. If your communications ends up antagonizing, annoying people, and that was not your objective, then you have failed. The objective of the communications should always be kept in mind. It is possible to engage with people who do not agree with you without becoming unnecessarily antagonistic. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been useful for you. Please like and subscribe and share the videos, and I will see you on the next one. Thank you.